We told you a little bit earlier on the show that Steve Moore, the president's choice to join the Federal Reserve, has taken himself out of the running, and the president grudgingly accepting that. Steve Moore is joining us on the phone right now. Steve, what made you get to this point?
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me on. I mean, it was very disappointing that this couldn't go forward, but, you know, the fact is that this kind of sleaze campaign over the last 3 or 4 weeks was just really too tough for me and my family, and, you know, we just decided it was much better for Donald Trump to select someone who doesn't have a 30-year paper trail. I mean, if people were looking at things that I was writing 25 years ago and, you know, looking through my divorce records, and it just was, too difficult for us. And I feel bad because I feel like I've let a lot of people down, and the president most of all. He was incredibly nice and kind when I told him about this, and he understood. But, you know, I'm bummed out, frankly, that I'm not going to be over there at the Fed, because I think I could have brought some ideas that the Fed really needs.
You know, Steve, you're very good with numbers. I think even your critics would say that. And maybe you were reading the math, that support among Republican senators might have been dicey, that you might not have, you know, the number you need to get to the Federal Reserve, particularly among female senators. I was just talking to Shelley Cavanaugh of West Virginia, who seems to think highly of your credentials, but had issues with some of the other stuff.
Well, that's exactly right. And, look, I wrote a couple columns. Literally, I mean, by the way, Neil, these were so long ago. One of them was like 19 years ago. I honestly don't even remember writing it. But, you know, they were insulting to women, and they were meant to be a joke. They were meant to be humorous, and they weren't. You know, some of the writings back then were humorous, but some of them were not. So, look, I understand some of the senators, many of them were, you know, upset and concerned about those writings. They were meant to be jokes. They were not people. And the media took them literally. But, you know, one of the things I would say about this, though, Neil, is, you know, the growth, the amazing growth that's going on in the economy. You saw the number that came out today, Neil, that shows big increases in productivity, which is fantastic. That means, you know, productivity is going to lead to higher wages for workers. We're going to get another blockbuster jobs report tomorrow. This is an unprecedented, at least not in the last 20 years have we seen anything like this. And I would make the case that, you know, growth is a women's issue. The increase in wages for women, the increase in jobs, women tend to be the ones in families that do the family finances. I know that's the case in my household. They are totally attentive to the economic security of their families and their kids. And so, you know, that's the most important thing. I had thought, Neil, when the president called me about this a month ago, we would have a vigorous debate about my economic ideas, and that never really happened. It became a kind of character assassination, and I think in part because the left understood they couldn't beat me on my economic ideas.
Well, Chuck Schumer has commented on this development, putting out a statement, Steve. First Cain, referring to Herman Cain, now Moore, obviously referring to you. Thank goodness neither were actually nominated. The only thing less funny than some of Mr. Moore's tasteless, offensive, sexist jokes was the idea the president would even consider him for a seat on the Federal Reserve. Now the president must nominate 2 serious candidates who will strengthen our economy. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, look, this is kind of a victory lap for the left because they took me down with a smear campaign. And, you know, but it is interesting to me. I'm going to go back to what I just said. You know, if they think my ideas were so, you know, out of the box and so, you know, so long, why didn't they debate me on the economic ideas? You know, you remember I was on your show back, I think, late last year, and I became very upset about the Fed's policies of raising interest rates back in December. There were a lot of people who were doing that, but I was one of the loudest voices, and people criticized me for being, you know, critical of the Fed. And, of course, you remember what happened. The stock market fell by 2,500 points. The Fed actually had to admit that people like myself and President Trump and others were right, and they corrected course back in January.
Well, then you kind of you took a different tune, though, you know, with the last 24 hours talking about the president who wants the Federal Reserve to cut rates a lot. I think he said a full percentage point, resume quantitative easing. The one thing that he criticized during the campaign, quantitative easing refers to the Federal Reserve buying Treasury notes and bonds to forcibly bring interest rates down to darn near zero throughout much of the last decade. But you said you would not go along with it. You didn't think that was a good idea. Did that raise any hackles out of the White House?
Oh, no. I mean, the president, I often disagree with the president. I more often I agree with him. But, but the irony here, by the way, is people were saying, I'm just going to be a puppet for Trump over at the Fed, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Yeah, look, do I think we should be cutting rates by 1 percentage point? No. I do think we should probably right away. The Fed made a mistake, I think, yesterday. I think they should have canceled the December rate increase because I think that's held back the economy. I'm a little bit more worried
so
right
you
now.
would have advocated that they at least cut that rate, but not to the status quo position they took.
Probably. Look, when I got over to the Fed, if I had gotten there, I would have wanted the Fed has the advantage of having access to a lot of data that you and I don't have immediate access to. So they might know something that I don't or that you don't. But, I've been on record from the start. It was a mistake to raise the rates in December, so reverse it. And, I do worry about whether we've got enough dollar liquidity in the economy to keep it. We want 3 to 4% real economic growth. I mean, Trump wants 5. I don't know if we can get to 5, but I do think we're on a course of 3.5% growth. I think we can bump it up to 4. And I'll just summarize by saying the whole mantra and theme of my campaign for this job was trying to educate people on the Fed, economists, and just American people that growth does not cause inflation.
And well, you did stimulate a healthy discussion about this Pavlovian response we have to growth. Just raise rates, and did make a lot of people think. But I'm wondering if this was also an attack in response to the president and his attacks in response to the Federal Reserve, particularly Jerome Miller, and saying, Jerome Powell, I should say, that wait a minute, we're going to make this guy, you, pay for the unending, constant jawboning, second-guessing of the Federal Reserve from the White House.
Well, maybe there was a little bit of that. I mean, obviously, the Democrats and the media don't like Donald Trump very much. I think that they also don't like me very much as well. I mean, I've been in this game a long time, 35 years. I've been very outspoken. And I think they were very afraid to have someone who's outspoken for free market.
But the media is familiar with you, Steve. You're not a stranger here. I mean, and over the many years, people on the left and right are aware of you. I don't know if they were aware of some of the personal stuff that came out, but did you raise that with any of anyone at the White House? Look, this might come up, or were they surprised? I heard one, again, these are always dangerous, Steve, unnamed White House source saying, we had no idea. What happened?
Well, you're right. I mean, what went wrong here was the vetting process because, frankly, Neil, I got to tell you, when the president asked me to do this job, I was very honored. I was thinking, well, gee, do I really want to be one of 7 people on the Fed, locked away with a bunch of boring economists, and cloistered away? But I talked to some people who've been on the Federal Reserve Board, and they said this is an amazing job. You'll really enjoy being over there and learning a lot about how the economy works and influencing it. And so I agreed to do it. And I got on this truth. I never thought it would be maybe a one-day story. Steve Moore's going over to the Fed. And then what happened was the floodgates just opened up. And if I had any sense that this would happen, people would be looking at my writings from 20, 25 years ago. I would have told the Fed, the president, wait a minute, I can't do a Senate confirmation job.
But you must have seen what happened to Justice Cavanaugh. You must have seen other examples used. That backdrop has changed. In other words, we don't look at candidates for any substantial office, and getting a seat on the Federal Reserve is a substantial office. The way we used to, and that maybe you should have. Maybe you should have told them, here's all my dirty laundry. I'm not saying it's dirty laundry. I'm just saying controversial comments, questionable battles with the IRS. I don't want to regurgitate all that, but that maybe you should have given them a heads up.
By the way, some of that stuff that the media dug up, I didn't even really know about or didn't even remember. But
which stuff didn't you know? Which stuff didn't you know?
Oh, the stuff I wrote 20 years ago about, this column on women. But, I talked to the White House frequently about the process. They talked to the Republican senators. They all, had a very high opinion of me. The Washington Post wrote a piece 1 week after I was nominated saying he's got it in the bag. And that's why they had to resort to the sleaze campaign, because they knew they couldn't beat me on the economic ideas. I feel very sorrowful about this because I do think I could have been a good voice over there. I think I would have brought a new perspective to the Fed, and I think that is very badly needed. There are too many Keynesians there who believe in the Phillips curve and believe in, that we have to restrain growth every time we get higher wages. And
then you have to spend to get the growth. And now there's not going to be alternative voices. There might be. But if the president chooses guys like you or Herman Cain, that's one thing. But he likely might not to avoid controversy. Then what?
I don't know where he's going, but I know this. There are a lot of really highly qualified people. Judy Shelton comes to mind. I love Judy. She writes all the time for the Wall Street Journal.
What are you going to do now? What will you do now? You never got this job.
I'm going to do your show, Neil. I'm going to come on your show. No, I'm going to continue.
So you'll go back to writing, appearing, media pundit, that sort of thing.
But also, whatever the president wants me to do. I've worked with him now, formally and informally for 4 years.
Yeah, he intimated that you would still be involved with him. In what way?
We'll see. But it will not be a Senate appointment.
All right, we shall see. Steve Moore,
okay.
Thank you very, very much.